Hey everybody, and welcome back to another compilation style video. Today we're going to be looking at every time the New York Yankees did something painfully embarrassing in 2025. Now I will say, first of all, that these were posted during the season, so if anything ever seems a little out of date, that's why. Though I do think these plays exist in a relative vacuum. Secondly, I have no personal malice against New York. In fact, I consider myself a big Aaron Judge fan. But the brand of baseball they choose to play and the market they do lends themselves to videos like this being made of them, much like their crosstown National League contemporaries, the Mets, who I'll probably have to do a video like this about soon enough. With that being said, I hope you enjoy. Jason Dominguez had a really rough spring training when it comes to his work in the outfield, registering multiple moments that left both Yankee fans and general baseball watchers everywhere concerned as to his ability to play there in the short term. And since the season has started, these concerns have been all but verified, as he right now is currently tied for last among all MLB outfielders in fielding run value at -4, outs above average at -5, and success rate added at -8%. We just saw what this looks like at its worst during a play against the Oakland Athletics, when he couldn't manage to catch a ball that had a 99% catch probability. Facing the A's in the 7th inning of a 6-4 New York lead, Fernando Cruz got Brent Rooker to flip a splitter out to left field. Dominguez came in seeming to track the ball before just pulling it up, letting it drop in front of him. Shout out to the Warmonger on Twitter for pointing out that this ball had a 99% catch probability, but that he wasn't able to make the play because of his -11.7 jump above average. And to me, it looked every bit as bad as that, just kind of sauntering in before raising his glove and letting it drop. This comment right below asked if the ball dropped as a result of the sun, and I thought the Warmonger did a pretty decent job of pointing out the fact that the sun was coming from the third base side of the field, so at the very least he probably wasn't dealing with direct sunlight. And to me, honestly, his body language didn't really indicate somebody who couldn't see the ball at all. At no point does his body language almost go stiff and protective, indicating any kind of confusion. He more so just raises his glove as if to signal to Volpe that it's his before letting it drop in front of him. And this would end up being a big deal for New York, as Tyler Soderstrom would immediately follow this with a fly ball of his own to the left center field gap. That also probably should have been caught by Trent Grisham, as he too ranged back a bit lackadaisically before seeing it tip off his mitt. This put two guys on for catcher Shea Langoliers, who then proceeded to crush a pitch right down the center of the plate out to left center field, just over the fence for a go-ahead 3-run homer. The A's would go on to take this one 11-7, but who knows how different the final score could have been had the momentum not shifted so dramatically in that 7th inning, which was in large part because Jason Dominguez wasn't able to catch one of the most catchable balls you will ever see on an MLB field. The Yankees have not been a good team defensively in 2025. This much seems pretty obvious, as so far they're 20th in the major leagues in outs above average at -6. But still, that's a far cry from some of the teams below them, including the Angels, who are the worst by far at -29. But arguably even Anaheim can't approach the single-game buffoonery that took place yesterday between New York and the Blue Jays, when the guys in gray put up what was probably the sloppiest single-game performance by any team so far this season in this regard, and one of the sloppiest you'll ever see on an MLB field. Now, I could go through a full game breakdown, but honestly, there's so many defensive missteps in this game, it would probably take 15 minutes to do so. So instead, let's just hop into the first miscue, which we actually wouldn't even see until the 5th inning, when with 1 out and 2 guys on, Max Fried induced a ground ball to the left of the mound, where the pitcher cut over before fielding it and firing a one-hopper to the catcher, who would see it go off his mitt as he attempted to tag Davis Schneider, allowing George Springer to come around and score. At least it was a tough play though, and I'm sure in Fried's mind, a necessary one. You couldn't say the same about the next play, however, which actually came against the very next batter, when Jazz Chisholm made a nice leaping catch on a line drive from Bo Bichette, then, for some reason, threw off balance to first base, even though Guerrero wasn't even very far off the bag, seeing the dying duck take first baseman Ben Rice into the path of the base runner, allowing the less than fleet-footed Blue Jay to get to second. At this point, you could already see the tension building in Aaron Boone's demeanor, but we were far from done. In the next frame, with the score now tied at 4-4, Fried would deliver a fastball to Ernie Clement with 1 out, seeing it fly to shallow right field, a truly routine play. But, unfortunately for New York, Cody Bellinger would seem to lose it in the roof somewhere, allowing it to drop and Clement to get all the way to third base. Toronto would get him across, and then, with 2 outs and Miles Straw now on third, Will Wagner grounded a one-hopper to Rice, who saw it deflect off his mitt, another routine play that couldn't be made, bringing in yet another run. For those keeping track, that was 4 missed plays in the span of just 2 innings, and the next wouldn't be any better, with Jason Dominguez allowing this line drive single to bounce right past him, allowing Guerrero Jr. to again get an unnecessary extra base, putting a runner in scoring position. After a 2-run home run from Bichette, Dominguez would see another line drive get past him, this time on a high one hop over his head. Certainly a tougher play than the previous one, but still inarguably another misstep, as if he cuts over, knowing how the ball bounces in Rogers Center, he more than likely keeps the hitter Alejandro Kirk at a single, as the Toronto backstop is one of the slowest runners in all of baseball. Back-to-back-to-back frames with multiple sloppy defensive efforts. Truly insane. The cherry on top of this crap Sunday would come in the 8th, when, with 2 outs, Jorbit Vivas couldn't feel this one-hopper off his glove. A play that might look really tough at first glance, but when you consider that the exit velocity was just 78 miles an hour afterwards, it becomes a bit less so in retrospect. And that was it. New York would lose this one by a final of 8-4, going down 1-2-3 in the 9th to seal yet another series loss to a division opponent, with this one featuring a gargantuan 7 separate misplays. And to make matters worse, they all came in the final 4 innings of the game. I've never been one for actively critiquing the moves of major league managers. It's an incredibly tough job, and the truth is there's a ton of information they have that we as fans simply don't, which can influence certain moves in ways that are hard to predict. But there are times when something so egregious happens that all we can do as relative casuals is point and ask, why? Why on earth would you make that move? And that's what we saw yesterday with Aaron Boone's decision to put Devin Williams into an extra innings contest when his confidence seems very obviously to be at an all-time low. But before we get there, let's go over the entire game, which got off to a fast start for the Houston Astros, seeing one of their most hated players by New York fans everywhere, Jose Altuve, give them a 2-0 lead 1 out into the game. But from here, rookie Cam Schlitter would settle down, not allowing another run over his next 4 2/3 innings. However, in that time, Hunter Brown, Houston's ace, wouldn't give up anything either. In fact, it wasn't until the 6th that New York would get anything going, with Ryan McMahon taking a leadoff walk before Austin Wells grounded a curveball down the line, putting runners on 2nd and 3rd with nobody out. 1 out later, it was Ben Rice's turn to line a fastball on 1 hop into right, scoring a run and pushing the tying 1 3rd. This meant that after Aaron Judge came through with an RBI single of his own, the Yankees had managed to not only tie the game, but put runners on 1st and 3rd with still only 1 out. This also forced Brown out of the game, with lefty Bennett Sousa entering, and he would execute his job to perfection, striking out Cody Bellinger and getting Jazz Chisholm to fly out softly. Nothing much would happen until the 10th inning, with neither club really posting a major threat. It was at this time I'm sure most Yankees fans probably expected manager Boone to send out somebody like Tim Hill, who has a 2.63 ERA this year, or Mark Leiter Jr., who struck out almost 12 batters per 9 and hasn't given up an earned run in his last 4 appearances. But no, instead of either of these solid options, Aaron decided instead to trot Devin Williams back out there, who had given up more runs in his prior 4 appearances than in all of his 22 games pitched in 2024. But even more than the hard numbers, it was his body language, to me, following his last appearance that really stuck out. The dude just looked defeated and definitely lacking a bit in confidence. And things would not get any better in this appearance, as on his very first pitch he would fire a fastball to the backstop, pushing the go-ahead run in Altuve to 3rd, after which he was scored shortly after on a soft single from Carlos Correa. Even still, this is extra innings in 2025, complete with the ghost runner. The Yankees still had a shot in this one. Devin just had to keep it close, and he did bear down to force Christian Walker to bounce a routine grounder to 3rd, with Ryan McMahon getting the lead runner Correa at 2nd. But the next batter, Yainer Diaz, would not go down so easily, crushing a fastball to right field where it clanged high off the wall out there for what probably should have been a double. However, because Walker didn't know it had fallen in, he ended up getting forced out at 2nd, giving New York a huge break. This put them 1 out away from escaping with just a 1-run deficit. But as you'd probably expect based on how I've been talking about things, it wouldn't end there, with Taylor Trammell then crushing a high fly ball to right, with Williams knowing immediately that it was on its way out, with the homer saddling in with another 2 earned runs, and his team now with a much larger hill to climb of 3. Mercifully, he would then punch out Mauricio Dubon to end things. And while his guys in pinstripes tried to fight back, registering quite a few tough at-bats in the bottom of the 10th, it wasn't enough, with the final score coming in at 5-3 after Trent Grisham lined out hard to center field. What really was the icing on the cake for me in terms of my judgment when it comes to the bad decision-making was hearing Devin talk after the game.
Not making pitches. It's pretty simple. I stink right now, so yeah, I mean, they give me the ball, I try and do my best. I don't know.
That's a player that just sounds defeated, and is in dire need of some low-leverage appearances to get his mind and execution right. Not someone who needs to be trotted out there in the biggest moments of a playoff race right now. Not only because he'd had a major hand in blowing the game in 3 of his prior 4 appearances, but also, obviously, for just the simple mental health of his player. Yesterday had to be one of the most exciting baseball days of the year, as we witnessed 5 walk-offs, 3 extra inning games, and 3 contests with over 20 total runs scored. I'm going to have to make a number of videos today to try to recap the high points, but we're going to start first with the loss that was probably the most tragic for its respective fan base, being the Yankees, who had to witness every one of the players they acquired at the deadline this year negatively impact a game versus the Marlins, which also resulted in some of the most frustrated commentary you'll ever hear from an MLB booth. But before we get to this agonizing point, let's first go through the entire contest, which would first see the Yankees get out to a 3-0 lead in a surprisingly scoreless game in the 4th, when Giancarlo Stanton crushed a patented line drive laser versus his former squad. That ball left his bat at 116 miles an hour. Big guy still got it. The Yankees would manage to add on to this lead in the 5th with 2-out singles from Jason Dominguez and Cody Bellinger, pushing their lead all the way to 6-0. But the fish would start chipping away in the bottom of that inning, when Javier Sanoja, who came into this game with a .631 OPS, crushed an opposite field home run, dropping the lead to 4. Later on in the frame, they would get a couple more when Liam Hicks flipped a single into center field with 2 outs. Suddenly, we had a ball game again. But the Yankees weren't done adding on, extending their lead back into semi-comfortable territory when Trent Grisham crushed a 3-run home run of his own down the right field line. This meant that when the new-look Yankee bullpen first took the mound with Representative Jake Bird, they had a 5-run lead to play with. But things would not begin well at all for the former Rocky, who would allow the bases to get loaded with just 1 out, before grooving a first-pitch sinker to Kyle Stowers, and offering right down the middle of the plate that got slapped out to left field, just past the reach of a leaping Dominguez. After getting just 1 more out, Bird would be done, bringing another acquisition, David Bednar, to the mound, with his first pitch for his new team atomized by Sanoja, giving Javier more home runs on this day than he had coming into the contest on the season, tying things up at 9. But remember, there still was only 2 outs, a fact that would haunt David following, as he proceeded to give up a double to the gap, then a little tapper up the middle that couldn't be fielded by Anthony Volpe. This meant that when Agustin Ramirez lined a single into left field, the Fish had somehow managed to erase multiple huge deficits versus what was supposed to be a stellar bullpen, en route to taking the lead late. But they're not a team themselves known for locking down the back end of games, and would further prove this by giving up a home run to Anthony Volpe just 5 pitches into the top of the 8th, setting things back to even and getting some momentum back for the Bronx Bombers. This takes us to the top of the 9th, when, with 2 outs, pinch runner Jose Caballero got one of the biggest jumps you'll ever see on a major league field en route to stealing his first base with his new club. Another recent acquisition, Ryan McMahon, would then ground a single into center field, putting New York back on top. Anthony Volpe would go on to add to his big day at the plate, which saw him record 4 hits, that home run, and a stolen base by slapping a fly ball just out of the reach of the center fielder, driving in an important insurance run. This is where things stood going into the bottom of the 9th, with another deadline pickup, Camilo Duvall, set to make his first appearance, which would start shaky as well, with him putting 2 guys on with just 1 out. That meant that when Xavier Edwards grounded a single into right field, the Yankees' lead would be cut to just a single run. Or would it? Because you see, Caballero, who hasn't spent a ton of time in the outfield in his career, allowed this ball to get past him and roll nearly all the way to the warning track, again tying things up. This did not sit very well with former All-Star Paul O'Neill, who had this to say immediately following.
Michael, you get to a point where you just can't make this up. I mean, the ball gets by. I mean, the base hits. The runners are running. It's like a Little League game going on out here.
Yeah, you don't hear that kind of frustrated candor from the booth very often, but I do think in this case it was justified. And there would indeed be one final indecency they would have to suffer, with Ramirez poking a little ground ball just out in front of the plate, but in the perfect spot to allow base runner Edwards to slide in safely. It would be after the contest officially concluded that we would actually hear Kay chime in this time without much of a filter.
All 3 relievers that were so touted that the Yankees acquired, they all did not do their job tonight. And we keep digging new holes, Paul, and this one goes under the worst loss of the year.
And I have to agree, scoring 12 runs for an offense without its best player, being Aaron Judge, only to lose courtesy of horrible pitching that you had to pay a pretty penny for, and some terrible defense that couldn't have been worse timed, has to sting like little else in baseball can. I may not be a Yankee fan myself, but I can certainly empathize with them after that abomination. I literally just came out with a video earlier today discussing the Yankees' disheartening loss yesterday that prompted their own announcers to say that it was, quote, like a Little League game out there, and that they keep digging themselves deeper and deeper. But at least there wasn't any major mental lapses in this contest. But you couldn't say the same about the game today, which featured one of the laziest plays I've seen on an MLB field this season, and in a truly unique way. Jazz Chisholm was leading off the top of the 2nd with his team down by a run, taking a close pitch for ball 4. After an out, Paul Goldschmidt came to the plate, and on an 0-2, popped a fastball into shallow right field, with second baseman Xavier Edwards out to grab it. But right as he went to secure it, he suddenly sped up his movements before firing to first base, somehow nabbing Chisholm off the bag for an inning-ending double play. I want you to take a look at his body language here from this angle. Just completely disconnected, and he doesn't lock back in to realize what's going on until it's way too late, resulting in one of the more unnecessary outs you'll ever see. And it probably couldn't have come at a worse time, as just an inning prior, New York had seen Trent Grisham get thrown out at home plate by maybe 40 feet on this ball that was lined into left field off the bat of Giancarlo Stanton, with Trent not even being all the way to third base by the time Kyle Stowers released it. Both of these moments would come back to bite them big time, as they wouldn't manage to scratch out even a single run in this one, losing by a final score of 2-0 after their own former prospect, Agustin Ramirez, crushed 2 solo home runs. If last night was their worst loss of the season, then this one just added insult to injury. The Yankees have become known over the last couple of years for their, at times, unfocused play. And while overall their defense has improved this year relative to last, they still have their issues with poor stretches in this regard. And yesterday, they showed this off in full force, while combining it with an absurd lack of control on the mound as well, melding into what was, overall, their sloppiest team performance since 1975. I'll explain that more as we go on, but first, let's go through what actually happened. Things got off to a poor start early for Luis Gil, who walked his second batter of the game, Alex Bregman, on a 3-1 pitch, and then 2 batters later he would do the same on a breaking ball to Trevor Story. However, in what would become a secondary theme on the night, the Red Sox would leave this opportunity wasted when Nathaniel Lowe flew out to left field. This takes us to our first real action frame, the top of the second, when New York's incompetence began by seeing Gil bobble a ball back to the mound, saddling them with their first error of the night. But oh, would it not be the last, as just 4 pitches later, Ceddanne Rafaela would ground a changeup back to the mound, with Luis making a perfect feed this time to second base, only to see Jazz Chisholm make a Javier Baez-esque throw into outer space on the pivot. 2 errors on 2 plays, and they would only just barely be saved from a third straight miscue when Ben Rice's throw to third base was caught on a dive by Ryan McMahon. If this ball goes into left field, it's an automatic run. The hitter at the plate, David Hamilton, would then take a changeup in the dirt for the 3rd walk of the day so far. Just 1 pitch after, Hamilton took off for second, inducing Rice's second horrible throw in the span of just 2 batters, scoring the Red Sox first run of the ballgame, and pushing Hamilton all the way to third base with nobody out. But wouldn't you know it, the Red Sox would try to out-ugly the Bronx Bombers when Hamilton fell asleep at third base, allowing himself to be picked off. Another base on balls would follow before Roman Anthony bounced a ground ball to Anthony Volpe. Ben Rice would go on to make up for his poor showing at the top of the inning, with the game tying no doubter to lead off the second. And the Yankees would even manage to take the lead in the 4th when Paul Goldschmidt singled up the middle, but this wouldn't last long either, as Boston would manage to tie things up on a sac fly in the top of the 5th, courtesy in part to a leadoff walk. Back and forth we would go, with the Yankees taking the lead on a Jazz Chisholm flare during their very next turn to hit, then Boston answering with an RBI single after another 1-out walk, again off the bat of Roman Anthony. This brings us to the 7th, when recent acquisition Lowe registered his second RBI of the night with a line drive double to the right center field gap, driving in the go-ahead run. Pitcher Luke Weaver would then load the bases with a couple walks, but lefty Tim Hill would manage to save the day momentarily with a clutch strikeout to get out of the jam. Ben Rice would then add on to his earlier production with a line drive triple with 1 out in the bottom of that inning, but I'm sure much to the frustration of New York fans everywhere, they would have to witness their own wasted opportunity when Jazz Chisholm struck out on a fastball right down the middle. Then Goldschmidt popped up to first base. Eniel De Los Santos would manage to retire the Red Sox without giving up another run in the top of the 8th, again working around some traffic, but after an impotent bottom of that inning, Goldie would take center stage once again by bobbling this routine ground ball to first base, allowing Hamilton to reach once more, while simultaneously forcing one more matchup with Anthony, and this would not work out well for the Yankees as he took a first pitch spinning breaking ball right down the middle and crushed it into the second deck in right field. And that was it. The Yankees would go down 1-2-3 in the 9th inning, dropping their lead in the wildcard race to just a half game over Boston. But it's worth mentioning as well that this was the first time since 1975, according to Katie Sharp on Twitter, that the Yankees had committed 4 errors and walked 9+ batters. One of those was intentional, mind you, in a 9-inning game. An ugly result in a contest so ugly we hadn't seen anything like it from them in over half a century. ESPN's deal with Major League Baseball is set to expire here relatively soon, with many fans seemingly excited at the prospect. And while I do agree the productions have gotten a lot worse, and there just seems to be a genuine disinterest for the sport overall at that company, there is one thing I do think I will miss a bit after it's gone, and that's their mid-game interview segments. Yes, I know other broadcasts will do the same occasionally, but it's not nearly with the same frequency as ESPN. It's not even that I find these segments interesting, really. More so that it opens the door for some really goofy moments, as guys are forced to attempt to make plays while having to answer the same inane questions they're asked all the time. And it was during one of these segments yesterday that we saw one of the more viral moments that we got during the Red Sox-Yankees series overall, when Jazz Chisholm made an error while being mic'd up. The Yankees were facing the Sox in the 3rd game of their first series of the year, when the Yankees got out to a quick lead after Aaron Judge crushed a 2-run home run off Hunter Dobbins, who before this game said that he'd rather retire completely than ever become a Yankee. Jazz, meanwhile, had responded to these comments with some posts on Twitter, indicating how excited he was for that night's matchup. It was then in the 3rd inning we would get to see our viral play involving the former MLB The Show cover athlete, when with 1 out, this happened.
I think we're looking at Second. Oh. Damn it!
Spin throw.
Spin throw is right. Difficult play. Difficult.
Yeah, that's all right.
Now, for those of you that think I'm making this video to mock the guy, you're going to be disappointed. Actually, I think he handled the whole situation pretty well, not getting frustrated or going silent after having what was a pretty tough play not go his way. Sure, it would have been cool to nail a spinning effort mid-interview, but I don't think this was the embarrassment a lot of people were trying to make it out to be afterwards. What was probably a little more embarrassing was how his team played the rest of this contest, as lefty Carlos Rodon, who had been dominant pretty much the entire year up to this point, would go on to give up 5 runs in 5 innings, including 2 homers, before the bullpen proceeded to give up 6 more, including one on this blast off the bat of Rafael Devers, who continues to torture the Yankees like no one else. And while Judge would add another blast in the 9th, it wouldn't matter much, as the Sox would go on to take this one 11-7, with Anthony Volpe striking out on an awkward-looking swing to end it. For his part, Jazz would end up going 0 for 3 with a sac fly and a walk. Not bad, but I'm sure not quite the results he was going for. Anyway, I wanted to make a video where I discuss this play, giving my feelings on it while also addressing the game itself. I get that a lot of people don't like the guy because he's polarizing, but I don't think there's any need to try to make a mountain out of a molehill in the case of a play like this. Not too long ago, I made a video about the Yankees playing one of the sloppiest games you'll ever see on a major league field, which featured 7 separate misplays. That's insane, right? Yet, I'm not sure if it compares with what just happened yesterday, when they did something so incredibly sloppy in one inning that we had never seen it before. New York and the Tigers were tied 2-2 entering the 7th, with New York having registered 2 separate solo shots and Detroit 1 2-run bomb. On the mound was righty Fernando Cruz, who entered the game with an ERA under 3. But right from the start in this one, something looked off, as on his very first pitch, he hung a splitter, seeing it crushed into the right field corner off the bat of Riley Green, putting a guy in scoring position with nobody out. Still, as a guy with some of the best strikeout stuff in the big leagues, this wasn't the end of the world. But things got a little more dire when he proceeded to walk Spencer Torkelson on a 3-2, then do the same to Wenzel Perez on a 3-1, loading the bases with nobody out. This brought Parker Meadows to the plate, the guy who had crushed the home run earlier, and he delivered, lining a single into right field, scoring Green and moving everybody else up a base. Cruz would only face one more hitter, Dylan Dingler, who would take his own walk on 5 pitches, this time forcing in a run. Fernando then gave way to Mark Leiter Jr. How would this fellow righty splitter tosser do? How about immediately giving up a softly hit single into no man's land beyond a drawn-in infield to extend Detroit's lead to 3, before hitting the next batter in the foot, driving in another? It couldn't possibly get any worse, right? Wrong. Another bases-loaded walk, and then wild pitch pushed across another 2. Then, to top it all off, Kerry Carpenter would lace a fastball to the left center field gap on what would end up being a 2-run triple. This would signal the exit of Leiter, with lefty Tim Hill being brought on to finally get the last 3 outs, but not before Perez would score the Tigers' 11th run of the night on a force-out. When all was said and done, the final line had been crystallized for Cruz and Leiter. 0 batters retired, 4 hits, 4 walks, a hit by pitch, and 9 earned runs. After the contest, which New York would go on to lose 12-2, Katie Sharp would reveal on Twitter that this was only the second time we've ever seen 2 separate hurlers give up at least 4 earned runs with 0 outs recorded, with New York joining the 1999 Angels at the peak of pitching sloppiness in one inning. But here's the thing. In that contest, which I looked up, these pitchers weren't back-to-back, as you can see from this screenshot, meaning that this was the first time we had ever seen 2 pitchers in a row retire 0 batters while giving up at least 4 runs. Remember, the total was 9. What a crazy inning, and another in what has become a long line of bullpen implosions from the Yankees. All year long, the New York Yankees' struggles were defined by 3 principal things. At times, unclutch hitting, bad fundamentals, and, above all, some of the worst timed bullpen blowups you'll ever see. Even still, they managed to win 94 games, drawing their nemesis, the Red Sox, in the wildcard round. Yet, in Game 1, the same boogeyman that had been chasing them all season would end up rearing his ugly head, leading to a breed of heartbreak that's gotta be sickeningly familiar to their fans. Things would begin pretty well for them offensively, as they proceeded to get back-to-back hits to lead off the bottom of the first after a scoreless top. But after a strikeout of Cody Bellinger and double play ball from Giancarlo Stanton, they would come out of it with absolutely nothing. But this would not be the case in the bottom of the second, as Anthony Volpe managed to, in a 2-strike count with a couple outs, crush a home run to right field, a shot that actually made him the first batter in Major League history to have 15 hits and 10 walks in his first 15 postseason games. Shout out to Nicholas Grishin for his email pointing this out, by the way. And for a time, this proved huge, as Fried managed to work his way out of trouble in both the 3rd and 4th innings. before inducing his last big play of the day a couple frames after, with a double play off the bat of Nate Eaton. Sure, the offense at this point hadn't really managed to get going, but at least they still had the lead, right? Well, as you'd expect based on what I detailed in the intro, this wouldn't really last much time at all after Fried departed with 1 out in the 7th with nobody on, as after a Luke Weaver walk to Ceddanne Rafaela, Nick Sogard would lace a hustle double to the right center field gap, putting the tying run on third and the go-ahead one on second. This put the righty on the precipice of registering arguably the worst timed bullpen blow-up of the year, and just 1 pitch later, he would officially do just that, when Masataka Yoshida grounded a fastball hard up the middle. You can see from the look on Fried's face just how frustrating this was for the lefty, who had pitched his heart out, en route to, now, a tough luck no decision. From here, the pressure would fall on the back of the Yankee offense, but they could get absolutely nothing versus big lefty Garrett Crochet, who proceeded to throw nearly 120 pitches of 1-run baseball in this one, striking out 11 before departing with 2 outs in the 8th, at which point nigh unhittable reliever Aroldis Chapman got bailed out after some miscommunication between Wilber Abreu and Rafaela, with Abreu managing to pull in a tough catch. Insult would be added to injury after Alex Bregman tacked on in the top of the 9th with an RBI double, despite the fact that there had been nobody on with 2 outs. New York would have one final chance in the bottom half of the frame, but despite loading the bases with nobody out, they wouldn't manage to push across even a single run, seeing Trent Grisham strike out to end it, putting them 1 loss away from the conclusion of their season entirely. The New York Yankees got absolutely curb-stomped by the Toronto Blue Jays yesterday by a final score of 10-1, giving up 4 runs in back-to-back frames in the 7th and 8th to take what was a 2-1 score and push it into blowout territory. This made today's game all the more important for the Bronx Bombers, who were sending their ace, Max Fried, to the mound to face a pitcher who had thrown just 14 innings in his big league career so far. But oh man, would this not go New York's way, with them getting beaten so badly they broke multiple all-time records for postseason ineptitude. The night began with Toronto's Trey Savage coming out and punching out the side in the top of the first, admittedly with an Aaron Judge walk mixed in there. Fried would match him after getting Alejandro Kirk to ground into a double play in the bottom half, but this would be the last time the lefty would get out of an inning unscathed, following another scoreless top half from Trey. Dalton Varsho led off with a double down the right field line that got misplayed by Judge, putting the leadoff guy on third with nobody out. This brought up Ernie Clement, contact hitter extraordinaire, who'd end up doing much more than simply slapping a little line drive somewhere, instead flying a curveball over the fence in left field. All of a sudden, the Yankees were down by multiple runs. This allowed Savage to settle in even further, striking out the side in order in the top of the 3rd. And from here, all hell would break loose, as Toronto would score 3 times immediately afterward, pushing their lead all the way up to 5-0. The New York offense had to respond, right? Well, not at this time, as they struck out swinging in order again in the 4th, making it 6 straight strikeouts for the rookie. Savage would end up finishing the night with a franchise record 11 strikeouts in just 5 1/3 innings, while giving up a single base runner and 0 hits. On the opposite side of things, Fried would be pulled after walking Miles Straw with a guy on in the 4th, bringing Will Warren to the mound in time to give up what would end up being the knockout punch, a grand slam to left field off the bat of Vladimir Guerrero Jr., his 2nd home run of the series. But not content with 4 in this frame, Varsho, a couple batters later, would add on, crushing a homer of his own to right, making it 11-0. In the 5th, George Springer would add a home run of his own, widening Toronto's lead, but more importantly, breaking a Major League record, as they had become the first team ever to score 20 consecutive runs without their opponents scoring even a single one, as pointed out by Sarah Langs on Twitter. But this somehow wouldn't be where the embarrassment would end for the Yankees, as after New York managed to get a couple back on a Cody Bellinger home run in the 6th, Varsho would add his 2nd blast of the day, giving the Blue Jays 23 runs in their first 2 games of the series, another record-setting achievement, one that I'm sure felt like it was being firmly ran down the throat of New York fans everywhere. And sure, the Yankees managed to score 5 runs of their own in the 7th, but at that point it was far too late, as it never really felt close again, with the final score coming in at 13-7, putting Toronto just 1 win away from going back to the ALCS for the first time since 2016, while thoroughly embarrassing a division rival in the process. Well, that's it. The New York Yankees season is officially over, following their Game 4 loss to the Blue Jays.
The Yankees lose!
Their fans are, of course, in an uproar, which is pretty typical year to year, but I do think they have a little more reason to be frustrated with this performance than most, as I have to admit, yesterday's game had to be one of the most brutal overall performances in an elimination game I've seen out of them in recent years, right up there with last year's Game 5 of the World Series. Things got started fast for Toronto, as we saw Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who basically was the Michael Myers of the series for the Yankees, lace an RBI double with 1 out in the 1st inning. To give credit where credit is due, Cam Schlittler, New York's rookie right-hander, would manage to get out of what turned into a jam afterwards unscathed, seeing Cody Bellinger make an excellent sliding catch to end things. Nothing much would happen for the next few frames until Ryan McMahon managed to take lefty reliever Mason Fluharty deep, tying the game at 1 after what had been a slow start for their offense overall. Schlittler then got back on the mound and managed to work out of a runner on second, nobody out situation in the 4th, seemingly giving his team some momentum, right? Well, you couldn't tell with the bats, as they would again go silent in both this frame and the 5th, having to watch as the Blue Jays took a 2-1 lead when George Springer lifted a sacrifice fly in between their at-bats. This put them down a run once again, tightening the proverbial collar of the entire organization. But it's not like they didn't have chances to catch up. In fact, they came in spades, starting with 2 guys on in the 6th inning, ending on a ground out for Jazz Chisholm, a character who would turn into a villain nearly immediately after, when in the 7th, with a guy on and 1 out, Andres Gimenez grounded a routine double play ball to second. But Jazz booted it, putting runners in the corners with 1 out, chasing Cam from the game in the process as well. This allowed the Jays to tack on 2 insurance runs when, later on, Nathan Lucas singled with 2 outs. Things were getting grim real fast, and it didn't help that again they would strand 2 guys on in the bottom of the 7th, courtesy of a Trent Grisham pop-up, before allowing yet another run in the 8th. Still, even at this point, with the kind of offense their team had shown all year, a comeback wasn't impossible. And they gave themselves another great opportunity in the bottom half of that very inning, when they loaded the bases with 2 outs. Just one big hit would get things within at least reasonable territory for the 9th. But any semblance of clutch would again elude them when Austin Wells flew out on the first pitch he saw to medium left field. Another relatively uncompetitive at-bat. And seemingly just to drive the stake in a little further into Yankee fans' hearts, they would manage to muster a small rally at the last second, drawing within 3 after Aaron Judge lined a 2-out RBI single in the 9th. But with Giancarlo Stanton on deck as the tying run, Cody Bellinger would not manage to get on, striking out on a splitter to end it. This game truly did feature everything New York fans hated about their team in 2025. The lack of a big hit when they needed it most, bad fundamentals on defense, and a bullpen that struggled to keep games close after their starter departed. Just truly ugly. With that being said, good job to Toronto. They executed everything they wanted to perfection besides in that Game 3, and have to be viewed at this point, in my opinion, as the favorite for the ALCS regardless of whatever happens in the Tigers-Mariners game. During his first 2 years in the big leagues, Anthony Volpe was a generally poor-hitting shortstop with occasional pop, some decent base running, and a far above-average glove, leading to some solid value totals and some pretty encouraging development for a player in his early 20s. But then 2025 happened, and Anthony proceeded to have what I'm going to assert is the worst season by a true everyday regular player in the big leagues. What's my reasoning behind this? Well, among guys who appeared in at least 150 contests, Anthony was either last or second to last in hits, batting average, on-base percentage, OPS, OPS plus, and Baseball Reference's batting runs. This is a guy who barely hit over the Mendoza line while striking out nearly 1 time a game and not even managing to reach 20 home runs in the process. In fact, the only player who was arguably worse at the plate who appeared in roughly as many games was Ke'Bryan Hayes, who actually offers a perfect segment into our next portion of the analysis, because, you see, the key difference between them was what they did with their glove. Hayes produced tied for the 5th best total in the entire major leagues in fielding run value at 17, in the same range as guys like Bobby Witt Jr., Pete Crow Armstrong, Mason Wynn, and Ceddanne Rafaela. He was downright certifiably elite. Meanwhile, Volpe committed a league-worst 19 errors up the middle, and while I personally don't put a ton of stock into that stat, he was also bottom 5 in fielding runs at his position with -5. This included a run in the middle of the season where he was seemingly making a horrible play every single day. And in big series too, like versus Toronto, contributing to multiple losses that ended up resulting in the Yankees having to play as a wildcard team by year's end instead of a division winner. And don't worry, we'll get to his playoff performance in a second. The last category of disappointment came with his legs, which had always yielded some elite results, including a combined 52 stolen bases in his first couple of campaigns, but in 2025 regressed down to just 18, with a career-high 8 caught stealings. A 69.2% success rate that placed him second to last among all players who managed to appear in at least those 150 games and swipe at least 15 bags. And while he was still good in the advanced capacity, being worth 2 base running runs per Baseball Savant, this was still the worst mark of his career, and less than half of what he had in 2024. Finally, we come to his playoff numbers. This is where his struggles really hit another level, because, you see, following a 4-hit performance in the wildcard series that also featured a home run, a great showing overall undoubtedly, Volpe proceeded to become the first player since 2013 Austin Jackson to strike out at least 11 times in a 4-game playoff series with an OPS of 200 or less, registering just 1 hit in that time while not managing to draw even a single walk. The only argument I could see against giving him the title as the worst everyday player would be the WAR one, as he ranked 10th worst in this stat per Baseball Reference at 1.6, again among those who played in at least 150 games, and 4th worst per Fangraphs at 1.0. but that ignores how WAR is calculated, as it features a huge component that simply gives you credit based on the position you play, meaning that Anthony received a ton of added value by simply appearing as a shortstop, even if, as we've already established, he was downright terrible at it. When you consider this and everything else that I've listed, I have to say that I think his starting spot going forward in New York has to be in a good bit of jeopardy, as it seemingly can't get much worse for the former top prospect than it did in 2025. Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.